generation capacity, it's actually running at 1/3 level of fuel consumption because it's not really overloaded, and thus, say, a few hundred gallons of fuel might last you almost a whole year. So there's, you really got to get into the strategy of it all.
Yeah,
for long term.
And in terms of buying strategy, cost everything out on a cost per watt. Like right now, if you shop around, you should be able to buy your solar panels for about $325 to $375 per watt of panel. And the same thing is true with batteries. I believe in buying low-income housing for my amp hours, and so I went out and costed out the most effective battery I could find, which is 6-volt golf cart batteries from Interstate, and that worked out just absolutely grand. So again, though, the question is how much energy are you getting or storing for how many dollars? And then there's all the other strategies too. Like we have goats, we've got hand tools. We don't want to run the ranch on power equipment. Power equipment's great in the summertime when it's 100 degrees. Don't get me wrong, but if you had to, where is your cool room that's built into the ground so that you're using nature's heat sinks to keep you cool rather than running an air conditioning system to do it? So there's all these strategies about leading a lower impact life. You can learn a lot of these strategies just by going to some place like the Yucatan area of Mexico and vacationing. I wouldn't recommend a border area vacation, but there are still some places in Mexico that are great to visit, and the people there have developed get-along strategies that in some cases are just plain brilliant, and you don't even see the strategies when you're there with the American battery pack for the laptop mentality. But if you go and you leave your hotel and only bring a couple of dollars with you, you'd be surprised, first, how far a couple of bucks can go. You can have lots of fun. But you may not be in the American-style hotel or the American tourista kind of shopping district that you thought. Key thing is, don't look rich. And that's
there's another issue there too, though, George, or another way to go about it, rather, and that is to look at the indigenous peoples there, but also look at our indigenous subclasses in our American society. So, for instance, online, if you wanted to sit on your butt this winter, go and do research with the small cruising boat world. Micro cruisers, pocket cruisers, they're called a number of different things. Small Craft Advisor magazine, because on a little boat like that, as George knows from having lived, a decade on a boat up here?
Yeah, just about 11 years on a 40-foot sailboat. Loved it.
Yeah, and everything's got to do double duty, right? Everything's got to be thought out. Your strategies have to be smart. Every time you can make something do 3 things and have a redundancy to it, you're that much ahead of the game.
Yeah.
We got a lot of folks. Sorry, George. We get a lot of folks that don't have a lot of money, So I kind of come from the strategy. Well, what's really important? Lights, water, and if you could keep a freezer going, then you could freeze like water jugs and then stick them in a refrigerator or a small cooler. So what would something like that, you'd need a couple of, 3-4 solar panels, the inverter, and then the batteries?
But that's not necessarily, but see, that's not necessarily a real good use of your resources. Because the solar panel and the batteries start degrading from the minute you put them in place. You got to know how to do maintenance on them. They don't just sit there. They need, some levels of batteries need things like distilled water added to them. There's a level of complexity involved with that. It becomes dangerous if you have children around. You're talking DC current. Dogs and children could be zapped. There's all kinds of issues involved with that. There's also the other problems with, perhaps local legislation if you're living in subdivisions and this kind of a deal. So you have to be real smart about where you put your assets here. Yeah, you need power, but effectively, How often do you need power? How bad is it going to get? Well, let's look what happened to Iraq. We came on in and we destroyed their infrastructure with the invasion. Thereafter, they had no reliable electricity and still to this day do not. What has been the local populace response? Generators. Yeah, the cost of fuel varies, but of course they're in a situation where it's not that bad. If you were, for instance, in an area where you were part of the country could produce oil or effectively some other energy that would allow you to have diesel, then perhaps the most effective response to intermittent power outages is a diesel generator, a reliable diesel generator. Those are frequently right now reasonably cheap, but they're going to disappear in over the next few years. Gas generators don't have a long lifespan, but that's much better than putting in solar panels and a small battery system for just say, for instance, for a freezer, because you need run a generator only for a few, probably depending on the level of insulation in the freezer, for maybe only say half an hour a day in order to keep the freezer going. Other things you can do to the freezer under those circumstances is to go out and get cheap styrofoam and slap it all around it, except in those areas where there are vent holes. These vent holes are necessary for airflow for the cooling thing, but everything else needs to be insulated. There used to be a process, in fact, I still use it here, called slow cooking, where you have a super insulated container. You can build these things. They're called straw boxes. Look them up online. And basically, you just heat up water in the morning, put it into a steel pot with beans and rice, whatever you're going to cook. Throw all of this stuff, once the water is boiling, put it all together with the rest of the food, put it in the straw box, and go away and leave it alone. It's kind of a slow cooker that doesn't need to be plugged in. And so there's all different kinds of effective strategies. And I would suggest that you have to have a lot of disposable income to make the purchase of a solar panel worthwhile relative to keeping something like a freezer going. The reason I have solar panels is because I have all these electronics I need to keep going. Plus, I use power tools, and I need my well. And that was my big issue, was the well's use is intermittent throughout the day, and so it made some issues with buying a diesel generator for that, and it was just much better to have the power on demand. Plus, I got my system back, 10 years ago, 11 years ago.
Mm-hmm. I changed phones, by the way, I'm sorry. The other thing that Clif and I both have, and we haven't really touched on it, is we both have sun ovens.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we can cook with no energy. Yeah, if you have sun. I have no sun this time of the year, but I also have a waste burning oven, a large cement structure I made out of cement blocks. Maybe there's $40 worth of cement and wire in the thing, but because it's technically a bread oven, I can burn it any time of the year, and I can burn waste wood, get the thing up to about 700 degrees. We've had meat eaters over here in parties in the past, and I've cooked a whole turkey in there in about, cut it in half, but cooked it in about 14 minutes because it got so hot. In fact, it burned the ends off of the drumsticks. It was so hot. But you cook pizza in there in about 2 minutes, and you can burn any kind of waste wood. You can also, if you really wanted to get into it, you could rig that as a water heater, a source for hot water for those times when you had no power. So there's all different kinds of strategies. It just depends on when you live.
And it doesn't take money. I don't know if you realize this or not. There's a young man in Africa who has a book. I think it's number 4 on Amazon. Was last week or the week before, called "The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind." This is a kid who in, I forget which country. It's in my books to read list. I've usually got a pile of books about 6 feet high to read. But the whole notion of it is that here's a kid, starting at about age 10, 12, decided he was going to build wind-powered generation. And he scrounged around junkyards and read up on electricity and built himself a 30-foot high tower out of lashed-together bamboo and put a big wind generator up on the top of it. And not only did he harness the wind, but he got himself a winning book on Amazon. And to my way of thinking, that is a Nobel Prize human being right there.
Yeah, and George brings up a good point. For $15, you can go and get a truck inverter, or not an inverter, alternator. Yeah. And that's basically a wind generator if you can figure out a way to turn it. So all you have to do is to craft some kind of blades that the wind will shift. And some of these things, if you luck out and you get one of the Fords, you can actually get usable electricity at lower than 3 miles per hour with a decent 6-foot wingspan. So there's all kinds of low-cost strategies that can be employed to provide some sources of power. Now, again, if you went to wind, you'd almost have to have a battery storage system, but there you go. At least it's a start in that direction.
Same thing is true with emergency shelter. You can actually make a serviceable teepee using traditional methods for almost no cost, and have a place to live that you can take with you. Other strategies.
You see these this is something that is just a personal irritant of mine, because we have local homeless camps around here, and people give them these little bubble tent things. I don't know what they're called. They're the snap together little tents that the hikers take up that have no wind protection or anything to them, and you have to crouch to even get into the buggers. And then in order to make them weatherproof up here, they have to put multiple layers of those blue tarps on them. And it is a very terrible existence when less material can go into a traditional teepee. You don't have to have large sticks, but this provides you with full standing headroom. Teepees were an indigenous response that developed over the course of thousands of years. Why should we reinvent the wheel? And they're marvelous things. I lived in some in Alaska, and they can keep you warm in the middle of winter and cool in the summer, because they have this very sophisticated venting system and a thing called a dew cloth. And they take, as George said, relatively minimal materials. You can pack them up, and you can even leave the sticks behind if you're sure you're going to get sticks where you're going.
You know, another thing that nobody carries, Bruce?
What's that?
Fire steels. I bet you my wife and I are the only, well, it's relatively more common here in East Texas, because we do a lot of outdooring. I mean, that's why people live here. And you're outdoors all the time. Your own property it gives you more elbow room in some of these places than state parks do. But a lot of people out here run around with fire steels and a good usable pocket knife with about a 3.5-inch blade that locks and can be opened one-handed. That's a habit I got in on the sailboat. I would never go any place, including traveling, without my knife. I have two knives. I have a case knife that my dad passed on to me from his dad, and great steel like we used to make in this country. And then I've got a high performance single-handing knife for my sailing days that was given to me by my son. And you develop a relationship with those tools that's an art form. See, people when they plug into TV turn off a part of their brain. There's a part of our DNA that carries with us thousands of years of survival skills. But if you don't use them, if you don't think about them, if you don't put yourself in new situations, it withers, and unused limb falls off, and that's that. But
well, you're quite accurate, George. It actually is the eye-hand coordination part of the visual response that is that survival skill component, which is disassociated from response through television, because the eye is stimulated, but the hands aren't involved.
And if you don't have any money at all, you could still put in a garden and at least develop skills of self-sufficiency. What does it cost to take a Red Cross test? You can learn basic life support online. Some places you can take the test for under $50. Get yourself seriously prepared to deal with any kind of ailments to come along. Raise your own vegetables, even if you live in an apartment.
Well, let's stop right there. Let's even say that if you have access to the public library or you have access to the internet, then what you can do is start teaching yourself skills like how to provide all of your food off of plants you don't have to grow through the wild edibles. Look up
foraging,
sure, foraging, and then also look at things like we must maintain our health. A real super good investment in dollars right now is anything doing with your health. If you've got the money now, get your teeth fixed if they need it. Get that, whatever it is,